Welcome to Theology Thursday. Sometimes when we want to describe something, that's exactly what we do. We describe it. Other times, we like to pull a representative, like show whatever this thing is we're describing. And the Bible is the same way. Sometimes the Bible just describes something, but oftentimes gives us an example or a picture of what that thing looks like. And one of those is faithfulness. The Bible talks a lot about being faithful, but we also find some examples of faithlessness and also faithfulness. And one of my favorite places to see what faithfulness really looks like, what genuine faithfulness looks like, is found in Micah chapter 3. Micah is one of what we call the minor prophets, not minor in importance, but just in length of books. And Micah is preaching at the same time as Isaiah, in the south, in Judah, and then in the northern kingdom, which was composed of the 10 northern tribes, we have Hosea and Amos. So all four of these guys are contemporaries in the 700s BC. But in Micah chapter 3, verse 5, he makes this statement, "Thus says the Lord concerning the prophets who lead my people astray, who cry peace when they have something to eat, but declare war against him who puts nothing into their mouths." Now, what in the world does that mean? Well, here was their view of prophets. You would hire a prophet to come and pronounce a blessing on your family or pronounce a blessing. So let's say, for example, that your wife is pregnant and you call a prophet to come in and pronounce a blessing over your wife and the pregnancy and the baby that's coming. So when you would call the prophet over, you were expected to pay. So if you paid well, what would they do? If you've given them something to eat, because they would pay them with food, because everybody was a farmer, they would cry peace. Like, man, everything's going to go well. Your wife's going to do well. The pregnancy's going to do fine. The baby's going to be good and healthy and fine. Everything's going to be wonderful. But what happens if you don't pay them? Well, you pay them very little, like an insult. Then they're going to declare war against you. It's not going to go well. Matter of fact, I foresee that this baby's going to have all kinds of problems and your wife's going to die in childbirth, kind of thing. In other words, the message that the prophets preached was based on how much money they could make. So that's what Micah is preaching about, okay? So now look at the punishment for those who only preached good when they got money for it. In other words, they're very self-centered. They saw this as a profitable enterprise. "Therefore, it will be night to you without vision, darkness to you without divination." So they say you're going to get no word at all. "The sun will go down on the prophets, and the day will be black over them. The seers shall be disgraced, and the diviners put to shame, for they will all cover their lips, for there's no answer from God." So they'll have no message. God's going to cut them off because they're not really faithful. Well, they are. They're faithful to money, but not faithful to God. Then we find this statement in verse 8. "But as for me, I'm filled with power, with the Spirit of the Lord, and with justice and might, to declare to Jacob his transgression and to Israel his sin." Okay? So Micah's not saying that a true prophet only talks about sin and destruction. That's not the point here. He's not saying they only say good stuff, but I say the hard stuff. And I've heard preachers that have said stuff like that. I'm not afraid to tell them all the hard stuff. Well, that's fine, but that's not the point that Micah's getting at. The point is not over the content, because the prophets have a lot to say about peace and restoration and protection and blessing and all that as well. The prophets are full of that kind of language. Like the lion's going to eat grass like the straw, and the kids are going to be able to play with the cobras because there'll be no more poisonous animals. There's lots of beautiful descriptions. So that's not what he's getting at, that a prophet only is doom and gloom and sin and judgment. But here's what Micah is saying. Micah is saying, my message is based on what God has said, not on whether or not it advances me personally in my standing with other people, or whether or not they like it, that kind of thing. In other words, I'm going to be faithful to what God has called me to say and to do. And I'm not going to let that be swayed by what other people say or other people do. I'm not going to kind of wink and not doing anything or say anything about the sin that people are obviously involved in because they pay well. It's not that kind of thing. He says, I am faithful to God. And so I'm going to preach. And that means sometimes it's going to involve declaring transgression and sin. Sometimes it's a hard message. But the real point here, again, is not the content, like, always sunshine and roses or always doom and gloom. The idea is I'm going to be faithful to what God has said. This is what faithfulness looks like. I'm not going to be swayed by money or power or influence or fame. So let me see if I can put this in a modern context for you. Okay? Here's what a modern version of Micah would say. Thus says Lord concerning his prophets that lead my people astray, and they say it's all going to be good if they get enough likes, if they get enough clicks, if enough people show up for the service. But they're going to declare judgment if they don't get the likes, if people don't show up, if people resist what they're doing. In other words, the influence in our life needs to be from God, from His Spirit, not from the world around us. That's what true faithfulness looks like. That our motivation is faithfulness to God. So I just like these verses because you and I face the same temptations to conduct ourselves in relationships with other people based on profitability. And that profit may not be in terms of dollars and cents. It might be in terms of popularity or success or ego stroking or whatever it is. That's not what motivates and drives us. What motivates and drives us is this is what God has said. And so Micah is just a great example of that. He's one of the prophets I really like and admire. And so I hope that what motivates you in life is being faithful to God, doing what He has said, saying what He's called us to say, being open and honest, never mean, but being honest, rather than other people's opinions really determining how you conduct yourself. But it's God's opinion that matters the most. So God bless you, and I hope that you will live a life of genuine faithfulness.